Hello everyone. I'm going to attempt to talk through a paper I gave to Knowledge Tree last year titled Digital Network Literacy, How it Affects Teaching Practices and Networked Learning Futures. So I prepared some slides in ImageStack, in fact, to go through this briefly and trying to summarize the paper, and I found it quite difficult actually. I realized after doing the presentation that the paper really does jump around quite a bit and make some fairly take some long shot arguments anyway. I still think those arguments are very important and relevant to the idea of literacy, but I just realized that they are a stretch to bring them into a nice, concise, clear argument. So this presentation will jump around a bit, may even be difficult to come to terms with, but let's give it a go anyway. As the name implies, digital and network literacy is something different to our understanding of literacy. So I want to start by perhaps defining what I mean by, or how I came to the understanding of literacy in the digital networked world. Starting with the Australian Bureau of Statistics, I looked at them in the preparation of the paper to come up with, to find some data on what level of literacy the Australian society has. And they defined literacy and claim it to be in step with international practice as a continuum characterized by increased ability to process information. I've sort of adapted their wording a bit there, or narrowed it down a little bit, but essentially that is the same meaning. They extend though by saying to locate, integrate, match and generate information and to draw correct inferences. Originally in the paper they focused in on English in print. It was their meaning of information, but I've taken that out because I think it's actually broader than just English in print, obviously. I also, around the same time as writing the paper, happened across an excellent paper put out by the Australian Capital Territories Department of Education and Training, and they, in that paper, 100 pages long. In fact, I didn't read the whole thing, but I got enough from it. One of the things that they said in there regarding literacies is that many students are entering their school or college with multiple literacies that go beyond text, and this trend will strengthen over the coming years. And then they extended their statement by saying educators will need to acknowledge and recognize these new literacies and build upon and extend them. So basically taking those two definitions, or not definitely, the first definition from the Bureau, and then this understanding of new literacies from the ACT's Department of Education and Training, here's me. I'll make an inference now from those two that that literacy is a continuum in the development of skills to locate, integrate, match and generate all forms of information, printed, digital and hyper, meaning connected, text, pictures, graphics, audio, video, text messaging, picture messaging, searching, the list goes on. So in other words, it's quite a huge thing, but I think the important thing to consider in that is that literacy is a continuum. So while that list and the interpretation may become huge, what literacy is a continuum in the development of skills related to that huge list. So what is digital network literacy? Well, relating to that definition, it is a continuum in the development of skills to locate, integrate, match and generate information on the internet. I sort of ummed and ahed about that, whether or not I'd say the internet in particular, or try and explain what digital format is and what networked information is, but that got quite difficult, so I've left it just with the internet and extended by saying digital formats and networked communications. It's not much good though using the same words, coming up with the definition and using the same words in it that you're trying to define, but that's the best I could do for the short time in preparing this. So here's where we jump. Suggestions for developing digital network literacy. So I was going to jump around a bit, and I'll give it my best shot. My first suggestion is, especially in public education sector, we should at least offer the option to use, free and open source software and open standard formats. What I mean by that, well, if people are not familiar with free and open source software, then you've got to jump on that continuum and get an understanding of what it is. It's software that is freely available. So if we take an example of, say, Microsoft Windows, for example, as an operating system that most computers come with, and especially all computers in Department of Education and Training sectors in states in Australia, then a free and open source alternative to Microsoft Windows is, for example, GNU Linux. And it's open source software, meaning that the way the program works is the code that makes the program work is available for people to look into and mess around with. So the argument I'm making is that by at least offering the option in education for people to use free and open source software, it not only does it offer potentially a cost-saving device for the departments, in that they might decide in the first instance that 1/3 of their computers will have free and open source software on them, so they've saved licensing fees to the otherwise proprietary software that they have on those 1/3 of computers, and then on the rest of the computers they'll install free and open source options. So on the same computer they might have Microsoft Office, for example, which is Word and PowerPoint and all of that, but on the same computer they'll have OpenOffice as one example of a free and open source Office suite, so that a user can decide if they want to use OpenOffice, for example. And I would hope that will the option at least will generate interest and awareness in open source software, and perhaps even some people will develop skills in the use of open source software and come to the realization that open standards are a more flexible format to use rather than the formats that proprietary software tends to lock you into and force you to keep using the software that they're selling you. So that's one suggestion for developing digital network literacy, is to encourage more use of open source software and open standards formats. My other suggestion is that the content is not king. In educational sector, I think we get very focused on the production of content, and this leads us a little bit down a garden path in over-investing and spending far too much money on content that inevitably becomes out of date in this information age. And so things like in Australia they have projects, TAFE Connect, which is has spent in TAFE Connect 1, and now I think in TAFE Connect 2 will be spending huge amounts of money in the development of digital resources for teaching their subject matter. The other ones I can think of is toolboxes, and what was the other one I used in the paper was Learning Federation resource development. Now, I'm not knocking necessarily the development of resources, but the idea, although I'm knocking the development of these very large investments in whole resources, especially when it comes around that the internet, as clearly demonstrable, is just awash with various forms of information, and at the same time the technologies are available to everyone to produce their own content. In other words, very easy to create videos, very easy to create audio, let alone to publish it all on the internet is free and easy to do now, which has really spiked the availability of content. And so while I'm not knocking the investment in the development of content, I probably am knocking the over-investment in massive content production rather than individual content items like a video on this and then a text on this. And then also, though, by the educational sector investing so much in content development, and at the same time adopting the ideas of intellectual property and copyright, and therefore choosing to protect that content with copyright licensing and login and password protection, has really defeated the purpose. And the adoption of a learning management system to contain and deliver that protected content and ensure the protection of access to that content really has gone against the principles of at least public education. whereas a person now is required to have a password and login to be able to see the content that you've spent millions of dollars developing, and so then the competition to that is obviously to go to Google and put in a Google search and see what comes up, and YouTube videos on laying bricks, for example, are more and more available. So the suggestion there is, moving on from that slide I've just realized, is that we need to break our thinking that the content is king and that we need to protect this investment and it's our intellectual property. We need to break that thinking and come to realize that content is now user generated. So that may be things like learner generated content, content-less courses where people who enroll in the course will generate the content as they go through the challenges in the subject. That we need to make our content open for Google searches and open on the internet. And that we need to decentralize our content, in other words, distribute our content across multiple servers, put our content on Wikipedia, put our content on Blip TV, YouTube, Google Videos, and if we have the capacity, store them on our own servers as well. And we really need to de-manage learning, in other words, get our content out of the learning management systems and on the open internet. We can continue to use the learning management systems if we wished for private communications and for content that we absolutely must protect for some reason, but not as a first port of call. And so the proposal there about the content is not king is that by getting teaching practices and even learning practices out on the open network, adopting user-generated principles for content will inevitably end in or help to develop digital literacies and network literacies. In other words, independent teachers and learners need more progressive literacy to realize that content is not king. Next suggestion is that Web 2 or networked learning or connected knowledge, engagement in that will help to build digital network literacies, but at the same time require advanced digital network literacies to engage with that. I'm going to quote something from the ClueTrain Manifesto, that networked markets are beginning to self-organize. The ClueTrain Manifesto was written in 1999. That's a fair old time ago, long before the idea of Web 2 and long before how easy it was for everybody to publish content to the internet, produce content and then publish it to the internet. So in 1991 the ClueTrain Manifesto came out, and it really was visionary. And its quote goes, "Networked markets are beginning to self-organize faster than the companies that have traditionally served them." Companies, schools, think of institutions as companies in this sense. Markets are becoming better informed, smarter, and more demanding of qualities missing from most businesses. So with that statement, I think we can interpret that in the context of educational organizations, in that our markets, being the students, are beginning to self-organize. I'm not sure about the K-12 sector, but I'd certainly expect it in the higher education and training sector, where access to information is making people more informed, and therefore they're self-organizing their learning around that new information. And as a result, demanding more things from our organizations. I guess I could be one of those people demanding more. That was from the ClueTrain Manifesto in 1999. So suggested resources for coming to terms with these challenges, the challenges of needing to use open source software more, challenges to stop appreciating content as being king and appreciate it more as a decentralized open content and user generated, and to appreciate Web 2 network learning connected knowledge. Resources I would suggest to reading is, well, starting from my own and working up, is the Flickr slide presentation called Networked Learning. It's available at that link. Stephen Downes's Connective Knowledge, an Introduction to Connective Knowledge, and George Siemens' Learning Theory, Connectivism. All of those resources and more are also referenced in the wiki for this paper called networkedlearning.wikispaces.com/. digital plus literacy plus and plus how plus it plus effects plus teaching plus and plus learning plus practices. So that was probably a poor choice of URL there, but hopefully you can see it on your screen and type it in there. In fact, if you're looking at these slides via Flickr, the link is clickable on the Flickr slides. So as I said, that jumps around a fair bit, and that was my first run of the presentation. I hope you got a few ideas from it or a few insights, and I especially hope that you'll challenge me on some of the thinking there and force me to refine this a little bit more. Thanks for listening.